Greetings. We are in Senior English B, and our objective now for the hour is to treat one of the hallmark poems of the English Romantic period. Tintern Abbey is what we abbreviate the title. Notice the real title for you is on page 780. I would put that full title in my annotations. Lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. Now, in my next presentation on this poem, I will give you a PowerPoint presentation that shows you a few photographic images of this area that we know of today as Tintern Abbey. For the time being, for your notes, let's just make a couple of quick observations, and you ought to have your book open now to 780, 781. We're going to give some introductory comments. Then we're going to work specifically with this poem. We're going to read it. And then we'll begin the process of exegesis. We'll probably have to come back to another session just to finish. I've already pointed out that Wordsworth, that writer of "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky, a child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety," the author of "The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending we lay waste our powers, little we see in nature that is ours," that guy, Wordsworth, is a Generation 1 poet who loves to go on these walking tours, and Wordsworth had spent some time away from, 5 years in fact, away from a very particular place that he loved very much. He comes back to that place, so that's the first thing you want to put in your notes. This is a poem about a return to a place. So we want to say that right away. This is a poem about a return to a very special place. This special place sits down in the southern part of England, an area we know as Wales, where out in the Lake District there's this beautiful, beautiful mountainous area where there's this old cathedral church. Now already by Wordsworth's day, this abbey was beginning its process of dilapidation. It will finish it today if you go and visit it, as many people do. It's just an old broken down church without a roof, and grass grows on the inside of the church, and cows pasture right next to the old church. But it's still a beautiful artifact. In Wordsworth's day, it was stunningly beautiful as a dilapidating building. It sits right next to a river that runs next to it, and up on a hill you can sit and you can look at all of the countryside. You can look at the mountains back behind. You can look at the beautiful river. Okay? And England doesn't use barbed wire fences like what you're accustomed to. The way they block off their land is to grow shrubs, hedges, bushes. And they grow them up to a certain height. And they grow them very tightly together, so you can't pass so easily in between them. And so they use often this as a boundary for their properties. And when you are sitting up high and you look down, it almost looks like a checkerboard or something like that, the way they kind of marked it all off. Wordsworth then comes back to this special place. Does not come back alone. This is important for your notes. Does not come back alone. He comes back. Wordsworth is by this point somewhat of an older gentleman. He comes back with his younger sister. Her name is Dorothy. Wordsworth and Dorothy are very close. She is young. He is not anymore. And at the end of this poem, he will speak directly to her. Okay, directly to her. And he will say to her important things about what it means to be young. All right? Now, one of the central ideas of Romanticism, and you'll be writing about this poem in regards to Romanticism, so I'm already helping you out. One of the central ideas of Romanticism is that you can learn really important things from nature. Right? That is nature with a capital N. 2, another central tenet of Romanticism is old people can learn a lot from young people. Okay? Remember, the child is father of the man. Okay? And I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. All right? A third notion that is deeply romantic is that simple ideas can help you understand complicated ideas. And we're going to see this in this poem. This poem in many ways is a very simple poem. This poem in other ways is one of the most complex you'll read. And we'll see how that works. Wordsworth working from the very simple to the very complex. If you will, this is a poem not only of place, but also of philosophy. Now, when I use that term, what do I mean? Philosophy of or related to the way we think about things, right? The great questions of life and all that kind of stuff. So let's do this. I'm on 781 with you. It's a fairly lengthy poem. Let's just read the poem, all right? So that'll be our first project. And then we will come back to talk about maybe how we can understand a poem like this. So follow along with me. Don't just listen to my reading of the poem, but actually read the words with me. And let's see how much of this poem you can understand on your own. Some of you already working with this poem on your own. I'm seeing some annotations in front of you. It's a good sign. Maybe you did a little research online to try to figure out what this poem was about. That's a very good idea. And now we'll go to the actual working with the poem. Tintern Abbey, page 781. 5 years have passed, 5 summers, with the length of 5 long winters. And again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come where I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at the season, with their unripe fruits, are clad in one green hue, and loose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees, with certain uncertain notice, as might seem, of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms amid the din of towns and cities I've owed to them in hours of weariness sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less I trust to them I may have owed another gift of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporal frame and even the motion of our human blood, almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet, oh, how oft in darkness, and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir and profitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee. And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again while here I stand, not only with a sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had no need of a remoter charm by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures, not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh, nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend. And in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege through all the years of this our life to lead from joy to joy. For she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts, that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life shall e'er prevail against us or disturb our cheerful faith, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Therefore, let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee. And in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sound and harmonies. Oh then, if solitude or fear or pain or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and these my exhortations? Nor perchance, if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service, rather say with warmer love, with far deeper zeal of holier love. Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs and this green pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. Now, let's just say a couple of things out loud real quickly at 2B. This is a long poem. Whereas before, we often have been working with shorter poems. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky, very short. The world is too much with us late and soon, a sonnet of 14 lines. But this, let's put it in our notes right away. This is a long poem. And by definition, a long poem will easily lose our attention. Can I just say that out loud? So for those of you that started listening to me read this poem, and you paid attention for the first, 50 lines, and then you kind of found your concentration going somewhere else, and it's almost like sing-songy. His reading almost puts me to sleep. It's like it's almost nap time when he starts to... For those of you who kind of had that sense, understandable. Now, Wordsworth understood that he was writing a long poem, and so he wrote this poem like an essay. And so at 2B, that's the first thing I want to write down. I want you to write down for yourself, because I'm going to help you know how to read this poem by helping you to realize this is an essay. But can I pause for a moment and remind you? I feel I need to do this. Again, one more time, hear me clearly. I am very pleased that you are with me in your senior year to study British literature. I'm very happy that we can talk about the Romantics, and I'm very happy that I get to teach you Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. But that is not the real reason we're here. We are here to learn to read. I was just recently, a few minutes ago, having some conversation about possible university plans after graduation. Some of us will decide to go to college. Some of us will decide to go to university. Some of us will decide to go military. Some of us will decide to go to trade schools, tech schools. Some of us will jump right into the workforce. It does not matter. In all of those walks of life, sooner or later, somebody's going to throw a piece of writing at you and say, read it and understand it. If you're at college, university, if you're in tech school, trade school, even the military, tests will be coming. In other words, I got to figure it out for myself. Much of the stuff you'll be asked to read, you can't Google it so somebody can tell you what it means. There won't be a Mr. McGee standing there saying, let me read it with you, and then I'll explain it to you so that you can do well on whatever instrument of torture or test or whatever it is that they're giving to you. In other words, you have to do it for yourself. Let me give you a case in point. What if this poem now you are asked to answer questions over, and if you did not pass, then you would be thrown out of the program that you were in? See, now all of a sudden, that lends new kind of focus to the project. What do you mean? Some stupid poem about some stupid church? No. You're missing my point. I'm telling you we're using this poem as a way to learn how to read other stuff that's coming. Our biology text, our chemistry text, our manuals that we may have to read in tech school, trade school, our military schools. Wherever it is you go, they're going to give you stuff you have to read, and you have to be able to put it into your own words. We have a saying or a term for that. It's called, you're going to have to annotate that text. Read it, understand it, and in some ways put it in your own words so that you can remember it. So we're practicing. That's all we're doing. And of course, at the end of this, yes, you will understand something about Tintern Abbey. You will understand something about Wordsworth and Romanticism. But far more important, we are developing that skill set, which is so important for your academic survival, your personal survival at times, and of course, we might say the survival of your spirit or your soul. That is to say, you may end up at some point in your life actually reading stuff just because you enjoy reading it. I am not suggesting that is Tintern Abbey. Although, one or two seniors have pointed out by the time I finish with this poem, wow, this poem actually speaks directly to seniors in ways that a lot of other poems have not. And we'll get to why that's the case. The first thing I want to say then, as we now sit up, pens in hand, and ready to begin the process of exegesis. We read, we put in our own words. We read, we put in our own words. Got me? And for those of you who are serious about going on to college, university, you'll do a lot of this in your major classes especially. You're majoring in psychology, you'll read your psychology text. You'll basically put each chapter in your own words, each subsection and the like. So we'll kind of see this poem that way. I'd like you to take a look real quickly for me at 2b, that this poem has a certain kind of structure. Do you see that? You'll have, of course, the numbering of the lines down the left-hand side. Do you see that with me on 781? Let's call these stanza paragraphs. Yes? And if this is an essay, and it is in many ways, this is a very famous romantic essay in poetic language. You're going to identify several paragraphs. Notice it. Lines 1 through 22. Stanza paragraph 1. Do you see it? The second, and by the way, I recommend that you be writing this down now in at level 1. And then what we'll do is we'll go through each stanza and we'll ask paragraph. And we'll ask a simple question. What is it that Wordsworth is saying? And then what does it mean? And how does what he's saying in paragraph 1 fit with what he says in paragraph 2 and 3 and so on? Does that make sense? So that by the time we get to the end of the poem, we're already recognizing that Wordsworth is making an argument. You want to write that down. Wordsworth is making an argument, and the way he does it is through poetic language. He could have, of course, written an essay, but he will believe, and maybe one or two of the rest of us will sometime believe, that poetry has a powerful way to kind of resurrect in our mind all kinds of beautiful images, and so he will use poetry. So let's go to it now. Stanza 1, paragraph 1, what does he say? We'll try to reduce it into our own language, so that way we can remember it. Notice, first of all, he tells us where he is and how long he's been away. 5 years have passed. So we're going to write this down. He's been away for 5 years, and now he's coming back. The length of 5 long winters. And again, I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Now, I want to point out for your notes, because I won't go into this in major detail, but you can see it for yourself. In the first stanza paragraph, Wordsworth will elicit all 5 of the major senses. What can I see? What can I taste? What can I touch? What can I hear? And if you look at it, he's basically telling you what he can see, taste, touch, hear, etc., right where he's sitting under a sycamore tree, looking out in front of him, seeing, of course, the beautiful country, the cathedral, and all the other stuff. What is it that he sees? Notice. And what is it that he hears? Notice. What is it that he maybe can smell? Notice. So you're just paying attention to it. If you were really doing a close annotation of this poem, you would write down all 5 of those senses, and then you would just simply report from these opening 22 lines, what are the things that Wordsworth is trying to cover in the 5 senses? Another way to say this is, let me tell you where I am. Put it in your notes. This is, of course, a poem about place, about a very particular piece of geography, and Wordsworth is happy to be back. The day has come again where I repose here under the dark sycamore, view these plots of cottage ground, orchard tufts at this season, in their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue. In the spring, everything is beautifully green. Notice the little tiny farm, right, with the smoke coming up out of the chimney. Jot down what kind of mood is elicited, what kind of feeling is elicited in the opening lines of this poem. For example, does Wordsworth seem to enjoy being back at this place? He does. Right? This is not a place that's going to cause him pain. This is a place that's going to give him some sense of joy. What else? Joy. We might say peace or serenity. Right? And again, we could jump really quickly if we wanted to 3b. And if I were to ask you, right now, if there was one place in the world that you could go to and make it any season that you wanted, so it doesn't have to be the winter, it could be the spring, it could be the summer, do you have one place that you can write down that right now you would go back to as your place of solitude, your place of peace? And if you can write that down, or think about it, because maybe you don't want to write it down, I could ask you, what can you see right now? What can you see in your mind's eye there? What can you hear right now? What can you touch right now? What can you taste? Is there anything you can taste in the air or wherever you are? Okay? See how this is what Wordsworth is doing. He is inviting you, the reader, not only to come to his place, but to recognize the value of place. Place is the way we know where we are. Right? Think about the removal of senses. What if you couldn't see? All of a sudden, place changes for you, right? And you start relying on other things. I've often asked athletes to try to explain to non-athletes what it's like at a culminating event. If you're a wrestler, for example, what is that facility in Casper like at the final round? So you can try to explain it, but until you've actually had the experience of that, that's very difficult to explain, right? You can ask, what are all of the different senses doing? And so here we go. Wordsworth introducing to us a special place. Notice a beautiful river running. The high cliffs. I've often said I enjoy teaching poems like this to students who grew up in a place like this. Sometimes my pals, other places will say, good heavens, how can you teach out in the middle of nowhere to those students? And I often will say, well, there's stuff I can teach that they get that your students, other places, they don't get. Really give me one example. Well, Tintern Abbey, for example. If you've ever driven up into that canyon that goes over the mountain to Buffalo, and most of you have, you know what we're talking about, those steep and lofty cliffs, right? Those large pieces of rock. I mean, at first glance, they don't look that tall. But dude, you could take the tallest building in the world and set them up next to some of those cliffs, and it would dwarf that building, right? Those are really high cliffs. Easily over 100 feet. Would you agree with me? Easily over 100 feet, right? Those kinds of images are the ones Wordsworth wants to come back to now, 5 years later. Notice the adjective 5 long winters. When we're in the middle of winter, this is a fun poem to read because we're reminded, you wake up in the morning and, oh, more snow. Right? That look Linneman has on her face. Really? Seriously? More? When finally is spring going to get here? Right? 5 of those. He's been gone away from this spot, and now he's back. Not in the winter. He's back in the spring when it's beautiful and it's green and everything is alive and growing. A copse, by the way, is a grove of trees. All right? And so he's back. That's another way to say it. You can reduce all of the first 22 lines to simply say, I'm back. I'm back to a place I've always wanted to, I've always enjoyed, and now I'm back again. And then there's a break. Do you see it? And then we're going to move now to the second stanza, paragraph, of our poem. Now to get here, I have to go back to my whiteboard, and I have to remind you of a theory that we worked with before, I believe when we worked with John Donne's Valediction Forbidding Morning. You will maybe recall, but let's put it in our notes nonetheless. If you don't understand this idea, much of this poem is going to be lost on you. If you do understand this idea, this poem then actually can be a pretty powerful tool for us. Let's take a look at it. The inventor of this idea is a cat named Plato, okay? Now, Plato is the great Greek philosopher, and he came up with what he called the theory of the forms. Okay? The theory of the forms. Now, the way that I like to teach this, because it's easy to remember it, is I'll ask you to draw 2 boxes on your paper. And the minute that you do that, some of you will go, oh, yes, I remember this 2-box theory, right? This idea. Above the first box, you're going to write the word images. But I also want you to write a new word there. I want you to put the word physical. Okay? Physical. And above the second box, you're going to put the word ideas or concepts. Right? Of course, this will be Plato's word. He'll use the word forms. But I want you to use the word metaphysical. Okay? And then you'll probably remember, right? I believe that we did this already. That we can posit, for example, a beautiful body. Did we talk about this, right? A beautiful body, I don't know, a Victoria's Secret model, Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, guys in an Abercrombie photograph, whatever, Brad Pitt for the, women who find him attractive. This beautiful body. But about this body, this theory says, sooner or later, no matter how drop-dead gorgeous that body is, everything sags and bags. And sooner or later, that body begins to get old, and then nobody really wants to see that body without clothes on anymore. Nobody cares about the Victoria's Secret model when she's 88. Ooh, we're all like, no, honey, just put the robe back on. Nobody wants to see that. But by the time she ages to that point, there will be other women that have replaced her because the concept of beauty seems to keep going, right? You'll remember that we pointed out other ideas. Like, for example, there's this thing called money, right? Dollar bills. But there's this thing called value, right? You'll remember. There's this thing called a symbol for a number. You'll remember. But then there's this actual thing called number, right? Okay. Or there's Ruthie's tree. Can I now reference it? There's Ruthie's tree that sits right outside of my window there. About that tree, all of the 5 senses can be utilized here. Ruthie's tree, you can see it, you can taste it, you can touch it. We won't get into it, right? Okay, all that. But what are we going to put over here in this box? Well, that's an interesting question. How did Ruthie's tree know how to grow itself? I love this question because it's a simple 3rd grader question that most of my seniors at first go, well, that's a dumb question. Really, then answer it. How did that tree know how to grow itself? No, you don't understand. It just grows like that. What do you mean it just grows like that? But what makes it grow like that? How did it know how to grow like that? How come it didn't turn out to be a pretty Christmas tree? I want it to be a Christmas tree. I'm going to holler at it to be a Christmas tree. No. Oh, man, you're losing your mind. That ain't the way things work. It's... Right? That's how we use the word, isn't it? It's its nature, huh? Right? Now, there's another word that we'll often use for this. We'll use the word energy. Of course, that's a fascinating word, right? Same thing. What about a human body? Well, yes, there's this thing, right? The human body. But there's this other part of the human, right? So, for example, I was just listening to an individual talk about being with somebody who was dying. And there he was. The day before, he'd had a conversation with him. He was dying of a disease. And he was having a conversation with him. But the next day, he died. In the hospital bed, he died. And the person I was listening to said, he sat there with him. And one moment he was alive. And the next moment he wasn't alive anymore. It was strange, he said. You could, cold, body started to turn cold and had a different look to it. And about that person lying there in the bed, you would say, that person is gone. But if that corpse could talk right after it flatlines and it's dead, the corpse would say, I'm not gone. Dude, I'm still here. Same brain, same skin, same heart. Nothing has left. And yet we say, uh-oh, he's gone. Well, what's gone? If the body is still there, what is it that's gone? Well, here again, we'll sometimes use the word soul, or sometimes use the word spirit, right? Okay. Now, if we talk about this box as things related to the five senses, clearly that's physical. If you can see it, if you can taste it, if you can touch it, etc., right? Over here in this box, we're looking at stuff that is, for your notes, beyond the physical. That's why we use the term metaphysical, beyond the physical. You can't touch beauty. You can't touch truth. You can't touch love. I mean, you can't touch these things, right? There is, as we've often said in 303, there's a monumental difference between the exchange of fluid, sex, and love. Those are not the same thing. Now, freshmen are stupid enough to believe they are the same thing, but we're seniors and we're aware of that. It's not even the same universe, right? Not even kind of close. Love you cannot touch. Where do you touch love? Where do you touch beauty? Where do you touch energy? I want to touch the energy of Ruthie's tree. No, you don't understand. It's kind of invisible. You can't see taste. Well, then it must not exist. Oh no. That's the point about this whole theory. Clearly, it exists, even though you can't see it. In the same way that we understand the difference between life and death. Right? Now, one of the things we know, write this in your notes, one of the things we know about this box right here is that it is transient. It goes away. It does not last. Most beautiful pickup truck in the whole wide world. And the kid works and works and works and works and works to save up the money to get it. Come back and visit it in 50 years. Right? Now wait a minute though. Sometimes the truck started out brand new. Then it became a junker that nobody wanted. Then somebody took it over and brought it back to its former state. What's the word for that? Some of you have been involved in this project, right? That restoration, to bring back, to restore. And to restore an old vehicle is kind of a cool thing, right? And all of a sudden you make it look like it's brand new again. And some of you have seen that stuff where they're like old vehicles that are kind of restored and you go, gotta say, pretty cool. I don't know, I'd drive it. I probably, if I had the money, would still buy a brand new truck. But an old, refurbished 1954, that's a cool old truck. Especially if everything in the truck has been restored, brought back to its former state. Right? We're going to use that term, restoration, in this poem. Now, again, one more time before I go back to stanza 2. Identify, Plato called this idea the theory of the forms. Look at stanza 2, line 1. Lines 23 and following. Look at what he says. Oh, I'm so glad to be back to this beautiful place. Uh-oh, can we say it? The first 22 lines, he's just described the first box. Hasn't he? What you can see, what you can taste, what you can hear, right? But take a look at the next line. These beauteous Uh-oh, what's the word he uses? It is the word forms, isn't it? So in your notes right away, once you know the Platonic theory of the forms theory or idea, you then can recognize this is a key word. Wordsworth is setting us up. He's going to move, are you ready for your notes? He's going to move from the physical to the metaphysical. Okay? He's going to move from box 1 to box 2. In other words, Wordsworth is going to become now increasingly philosophic. He's interested more in the second box. See, back to my whiteboard. If you need a way to define a philosopher is an individual who is not so much interested in the first box, a beautiful Victoria's Secret model, as much as he or she's interested in the second box. What does it mean to be beautiful? And do you remember in middle school when silly things like the way you cut your hair or the clothes that you wore actually defined who you were? No, I'm serious. Some of you will have forgotten this. You some days did not, are you ready for this? Some of you on some days in middle school did not want to go to school simply because of the way you looked. Somebody might make fun of me. Oh, good heavens. And then I'll feel, oh no, how can I live with somebody might laugh at me. As you get older, you kind of have a tendency to go, okay, that was pretty stupid, pretty dumb. Right. In other words, as you get older, and this is true of seniors, they will often look at freshmen and go, seriously, grow up. What they have a tendency to forget is that a brief 3 years before, that was them. That was them. No, it was never me. Oh, it was. Trust me, I saw you when you're a freshman. Yeah, it was. We have a tendency quickly to forget. Let's put it in our notes. Wordsworth wants to remember. Look at how he says it. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, he's been gone for 5 years, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. What does that mean? Can you put it in your own words? I'm teaching you how to read here. What does that mean? Read the words and then try and put it in your own words. He says, this beautiful stuff that I've seen, these beauteous forms, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, din means noise here, I've owed to them in hours of weariness sensations sweet. What? What is he saying? Even though I haven't been here, he says, even though for 5 years I haven't been here, I haven't seen his beautiful mountains or whatever, I could still call them up in my imagination, in my mind's eye. And seeing this beautiful place in my mind's eye did what? Well, read it with me again. He said, I've owed to them in hours of weariness sensation sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my pure mind with tranquil, there's the R word. Did you see it? That's why you wrote it down. Are you ready for this? Wordsworth has an intuition or an idea. He says it this way. When life starts to get really crappy, and guess what? It will. It will. When life starts to get really crappy, your body and your soul need to be restored. And one way to do that is to go back to a place that you love. Not necessarily physically, but to go back in your mind. That ability allows for you to do what? To get some kind of tranquil restoration. See the dash? It also will help your feelings. Feelings, too, of unremembered pleasure. Such, perhaps, as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life. Here it is. If you want to know, Wordsworth says, if you want to know that you've lived a good life, if you want to know the moment that you die, your life has been well lived, here it is. How do you know it? I've had seniors that write this line down. I've had seniors that put this line up on their dorm wall to remind themselves. Because this is it. He's going to tell you how you know whether you lived a good life or not. Before you go, how will you know? Little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Look at it again. If you want to know that your life has been well lived, he says, here it is. I will tell you how you can know that. Little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. See, we have a tendency to think that the greatest people who ever lived did great things. They did the big things. They did the stuff everybody talks about, and Wordsworth says not true at all. The most important things that ever happen in your life, that you ever do or are done for you, little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. I like to point this out to seniors. Think about how many years you've been living where for most of those days you had somebody who made you a meal. I don't want to insult you, but think about this for a moment. You sat down and you ate that meal, and then you pushed yourself away from a table and ran off to do whatever it is you had to do. How rarely have you stopped for even a second and looked at the person who made that meal and said, "Look at me. I need you to hear what I'm about to say." You say this to the person. "I need you to hear me. I need you to hear me say, for the meal you just made for me, thank you. I mean this, thank you." You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to do that. I remember a ball player. She was a great volleyball player in her senior year, and she's signed up to do kid coaching for volleyball girls. Little 5- and 6-year-old girls. She said, came back, "It's insanity. They never stand still. They're always talking. They're always giggling. It's like herding cats. It's insane." Halfway through my first night with them, it hit me. When I was 6, I was standing right there. And some high school girl was doing the same thing. Never occurred to me once to say to her, "Hey, thanks for teaching me how to play this game." Why? Because when you're a child, you're young and stupid. You take what people give to you, and it doesn't occur to you to say, "Thank you." How about this for a homework project tonight? If somebody's made you a meal, before you push your chair away and walk away to go to your room to do whatever insanity you got to do, homework or whatever, how about say thank you to the person who made the meal? Say thank you. Can I say it this way? You only have a few more days with some of these people. You might as well start learning how to say thank you for the little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love. Thanks, guys. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll pick up right there.